Paul. As head of the analytical team, we're here to discuss China's new export controls on critical materials, and I'd like your inputs on the topic as well. So, we are standing at the edge of a new era, not one defined by tariffs alone, but by material sovereignty, I'd like to think. China's export controls on rare earths and critical minerals are kind of marking a strategic escalation. It's a move that's pushing the battleground deeper into the midstream of global value chains. This isn't just about commodities anymore, it's also about controlling the building blocks of the 21st century economy, right? The the magnets that make our motors spin, the alloys that make our aircraft stealthy, and the materials that power every smartphone, EV, and missile guidance system on Earth.
Yeah, look, that's 100% correct. And so what we are now looking at, rather than looking at what China says and does and America says and does, what we need to do is look at the indicators of who's getting upper hand. So obviously, Trump's pushing back emotionally, changing, saying he's going to do X, pulling back a little bit from his original position. But behind this is a battle for key rare earth minerals. And so understanding which are key and which have sufficient supply is something that you need to task your team to assess and evaluate and get on top of. Okay, but please go on.
Sure, Paul. So let's look at what's changed and why it matters. For years now, China has been the quiet giant of the rare earths world. It's refining more than 85% of the global supply. And now it's tightening the reins. The new rules expand export licensing to cover 12 of the 17 key rare earth minerals, including holmium, erbium, thulium, europium, and ytterbium. But this time, China's gone further. Exports of magnets, magnet components, and semiconductor-related products containing even trace amounts of Chinese origin rare earths now require approval. And critically, this is very similar to a foreign direct product rule, which asserts control over foreign-made goods that use Chinese materials or technology. In short, this is no longer a simple customs form, it's a global compliance regime of sorts. China is not banning exports outright, but it is asserting the right to license, delay, or even deny them. So these new regulations even restrict Chinese nationals or firms from joining overseas rare earth ventures without state approval. So this is kind of giving a signal that Beijing intends to keep its knowledge, its technology, and its leverage closer to home.
Okay, so technical spiel, and as an analyst taking away pro-America or anti-China rhetoric, so what does that mean? Okay, what does it mean when China's exerting these issues, knowing full well it's going to lead to a tariff increase or other hostilities or possibly in the future sanctions, because America will want to exert its hegemonic power. So as an analyst, what can we draw from China making such calls? So what does that mean?
Well, Paul, we are seeing some of the ripple effects already spreading across the Atlantic. When we look at the US, we have companies like Tesla, General Motors, Raytheon, who face potential disruptions in their supply of high-performance magnets. And then we look at Lockheed Martin and the likes, whose missiles and aircraft depend on rare earth-based components. So they could see production bottlenecks.
That's right. So let me fill in a couple of the steps because you jumped ahead there. So what? It means China is confident that it controls enough rare earth minerals that it can retaliate against the tariffs initiated by America by exerting its own controls, and it's chosen future technologies that are dependent, and AI that's dependent on development of chips and weaponries that are developed and aircraft and key components in both warfare and communications. It is now stressing its might. Is that a fair conclusion?
That's correct, Paul. There were a lot of analysts who'd come out over recent years who were talking about this, and I think it's more recently that the reactions from the US are coming out. But the so what is that today Beijing controls a lot of the credible choke points. It has levers that it can pull in any diplomatic, trade, or security dispute. It's no longer confined into just your direct warfare. There is economic warfare, geopolitical warfare, and this sort of export controls that we're seeing could potentially reshape the global map of trust and supply chains itself.
Well, that's right. And so you've got a situation where China's might is growing. It is not seen as somebody that goes in and makes statements like you're either with us or against us. So it's more into developing relationships. The West always twists that China's trying to take over poor countries by lending them money. And depending on how biased you are or are not, you will make a conclusion, a hard and fast conclusion that you're pro-China and that's okay, or you're pro-American and therefore China is sinister in how it develops. But what it's not doing is making countries make a decision that you must be with us or you're against us. So if we look now at how China is sitting, we can conclude that they've made a decision that they are going to control what they believe is critical strategic minerals. And what that means is they're prepared to take the United States head on with its tariffs. And at that point, we go back to your original response to me. How's that going to affect Apple? How's it going to affect Microsoft? How's it going to affect social media, Chinese companies getting cut out of the American economy? Now China doesn't elect somebody every 5 years. It decides who's the smartest to run the show, because their greatest problem is internal stability. So they have to worry about not imploding. America's pretty much focused on two things: trying to be hegemonic power, and some of the smarter brains in America are also perhaps thinking about, is our Thucydides moment coming, and are we accelerating our demise? So you've got that push and pull within America. But as below your level, the other analysts need to be looking at, how is this going to impact our clients? How is it going to impact UN agencies, American companies, relationships with oil and gas companies in America with China? And then what is going to be critical? Is oil and gas, for how long is it going to remain critical? When are rare earth minerals and other technologies going to become more critical? And are things like Apple iPhones and Microsoft computers so good that they can't be replaced by cheaper copies from China when a hegemonic power says you're not going to sell stuff in our country? Okay, so you're saying you can now produce cheaper stuff, ship it all around the world direct from China. So I don't think people are looking at the spin-on consequences of current tit-for-tat plays. And I think President Trump, the way he deals with things is popularity first, strategic impact, manage that later. China thinks the opposite. Strategic outcomes first, 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. Popularity doesn't really come into the equation. Okay? So to train the analysts on, because at the end of the day, it's impossible to evaluate exactly when China, and I don't mean if, but when China dominates, at what point is this going to have massive impacts on American companies, especially given the confrontational nature of a lot of what America's been doing with conflicts across the world, and always justifying it for a reason, but it's involved in many conflicts. But in terms of economic tariffs and sanctions and all the way it thinks it has ultimate power and it can act however it wants with impunity to other values. So, that's your, myself, would a bugger to look at, but the analysts need to be looking at what's happening now, how's that going to affect our clients in the next 12, 18, 24 months, okay?
Right, Paul. And if I could just talk about America's response here.
Yes.
So President Trump has had a sort of he's had a reaction on his social media platform. He's vowed to impose 100% tariffs on Chinese imports starting from November 1st. He's floating these new export controls on critical US software and potentially targeting AI chip design and industrial modeling tools that China still depends on.
Yes.
And the Pentagon's expanding its strategic stockpiles of rare earths and critical minerals. Now, where are we today in terms of the US dependency on China or Chinese dependency vis-a-vis the US? Who is likely to lose more from this sort of a tit-for-tat war of sorts you're seeing?
Yeah, well, we can't answer that, right? All we can do is look at the future indicators of where it's going. But I see China's outwardly commenting on how it intends to act with rare earth minerals as an indicator that America's belief that its superior technology and its exceptionalism of investments support to entrepreneurs may be being overrated in the States, and that China may be getting more ducks in a row, or it may even have made a decision, you know what, we may not be at the same level in terms of super chip design, but if we are going to have a battle about supplying the American market, let's go, okay, it's going to take us 2, 3, 5 years to catch up on that design and that technology, but let's have that battle now, but let's create a problem ultimately causing bottlenecks in their supply of rare earth minerals. And just as they're hitting challenges with supply of critical minerals, China has bridged that gap. So we need to keep workshopping and forecasting why China is being so bold, because China doesn't jump on social media and say the next thing in its head. Everything that it releases, it's a brain's trust of a Politburo that sits down and works out, right, which way are we going and why are we going there? Because it's not trying to pretend it's got hegemonic power. It's actually stating we want to be a responsible global leader and we want to have partners that help us move forward in a congenial, coexisting manner. And so every time it's going to make a decision, it's not going to, have a bottle of wine, social media and Twitter something away, nor is it going to walk into and talk to one advisor or one key guy, yes man in the White House, and then jump on Twitter or jump on a news conference. It's going to really carefully consider what it does, because the credibility of its leadership is being judged internally in a massive critical way, and they need to maintain power internally to maintain peace internally. Whereas in the States, there's a lot of decisions getting reflected by who in the inner sanctums makes money out of certain decisions, right from the oil and gas companies to the inner sanctum that control power and popularity come election time. So you could argue that the States is, particularly under Trump's, becoming more about popularity for power, for wealth, whereas China's more about taking the nation forward, but doing it in a manner that we have to focus on loading. So what we have to do now is look at China's wording as an indicator to why it is taking these actions, rather than trying to anticipate, well, who's going to win this war? Because this war in search of power isn't so much what's going to dictate what happens to our clients in the next 5 years, but it's the perception of what America says it's trying to do, says what it's going to do on the short term, and what China says and does, that's going to affect our investors for the next 5, 10, 15 years while this battle for ascendancy progresses, okay?
Got it, Paul.
Awesome. Thanks, Ravi. Great chat. Cheerio.
Thanks, Paul.